The morning begins like any other in Lena's DC condo. Sunlight spills across the floor. The smell of coffee fills the air, and everything feels calm for a moment. She scrolls through her phone, half awake, half at peace, until she hears it. That sound again, a deep, wet gurgle from the bathroom. It starts soft, then grows louder, heavier, like something alive moving inside the pipes. She sets her coffee down slowly, listening. Another gurgle follows, this time longer, thicker. Her stomach sinks. Not again, she mutters under her breath. She walks toward the bathroom, already dreading what she'll find. The air feels damp, faintly sour. She stares at the toilet, the water trembling in slow, circular ripples. Then, with a violent bubble, it erupts. Brownish water spits up and splashes across the tiles. She grabs a handful of towels and throws them on the floor, her voice rising in frustration. Come on, please, not again. But it's useless. The water keeps coming, seeping through the edges, darkening the grout, crawling toward the hallway. The smell hits her next. Thick, rotten, unmistakable. She gags, turning her head away, eyes watering as she pushes the mess back with her foot. She remembers the last time. The same smell. The same disaster. She had spent hours scrubbing, disinfecting, opening every window just to breathe again. And when she called the HOA, all she got was a polite email saying, "Please note that unit-level plumbing is the homeowner's responsibility." She had written back, explaining that her neighbor's drains were making the same sound. The HOA promised to forward the concern to building management. 2 weeks passed. Nothing changed. Now here it was again. Louder, worse, mocking her. She drops onto her knees, exhausted, pressing towels into the puddle. Then a new sound makes her freeze, a low, echoing groan from inside the shower drain. Bubbles begin to rise there too, slow at first, then faster. The smell thickens. Her phone buzzes beside her. It's her neighbor, Mark. "Hey, Lena, are your pipes making that sound again?" She stares at the bubbling mess and forces a laugh. "Yeah, it's a concert in here." Mark sighs on the other end. "Mine too. They said they cleaned the line last week." Lena looks around her bathroom. Soaked towels, brown streaks, the water line around the toilet bowl. Her jaw tightens. "They didn't fix anything," she says quietly. She stands, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Tired, angry, determined. Then her eyes drift toward the vent. The air from the building's shared line flows both ways. The same air that carries the smell from her unit can travel upward. Her lips curl into the faintest, knowing smile. "They said it's my problem." "Fine," she whispers. "Let's see how they handle it when the smell becomes their problem too." The gurgling sound echoes again, steady, wet, and threatening, as Lena turns off the bathroom light. The war with the HOA has only just begun. Lena remembers when she first moved into the condo. Everything looked perfect. Marble floors in the lobby, the faint scent of air freshener in every hallway, and that brochure smile from the property manager when she got her keys. It was supposed to be peaceful, simple, maintenance-free living. For the first few months, it was exactly that. Morning walks to the coffee shop, friendly nods from neighbors, and quiet evenings with nothing but the hum of city life outside her window. She used to laugh at the thought of HOA drama, that was for suburban neighborhoods with lawns and nosy Karens, not for her sleek little DC building. Then came the first gurgle. It started small, a faint sound, from the pipes when she ran her sink. She didn't think much of it. A week later, it grew louder. A wet, bubbling sound that echoed through the bathroom like something alive inside the walls. She mentioned it to her upstairs neighbor, Mark, one morning in the hallway. "Yeah," he said, lowering his voice. "Ours too. We called management. They said they'd check it." A few days later, 2 maintenance guys showed up. They dragged in a long drain snake, clattered around for 20 minutes, then smiled like everything was fixed. "Just a small blockage outside, ma'am. All clear now." They left muddy footprints by the door, and within 2 days, the gurgling was back, louder than ever. Lena recorded the sound on her phone and sent it to the HOA. A polite email arrived the next day. Thank you for reporting this issue. The problem has been resolved. Resolved. She stared at the word and laughed to herself. Resolved, like how putting perfume on garbage resolves the smell. Over the next few weeks, she sent more complaints. Each one came back with the same message, the same copy-paste line, the same fake reassurance. The issue has been resolved. Mark texted her again. They said the same thing to me. My shower still sounds like it's gargling mouthwash. She began to notice the thinness of the walls, how every conversation, every flush, every sigh from above seemed to echo. The building wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. And in that hollow quiet, the pipes groaned again. Every night, the same sounds pulsed beneath her floorboards. Sometimes, when she stood barefoot in the bathroom, she could feel the vibration under the tiles, a slow, churning movement deep in the building's gut. She wrote a longer email this time, polite but firm, quoting the plumber who'd told her the issue was in the shared line, not her own. She even attached photos of the last overflow, the stains that wouldn't come out, the towels she'd thrown away. Days passed. No reply. Then, finally, a short message. Please contact building management directly. HOA is not responsible for unit-level maintenance. Lena stared at the screen, her patience unraveling. They weren't reading her messages anymore. They were just sending scripts. She leaned back in her chair, muttering, So this is what I pay fees for, to get ignored in high definition. The next morning, she woke up to that same echo, a low, watery moan through the pipes. It was the sound of neglect, of bureaucracy pretending to listen. And as it filled the room again, Lena realized something. This wasn't just bad plumbing. This was the sound of an HOA that didn't care until it affected them. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the bitterness matching her mood. If they want to ignore it, she said quietly, I'll make sure they can't anymore. The morning it happened, Lena already had that uneasy feeling. The air was too still, the pipes too quiet. She knew the rhythm by now. Silence meant pressure was building somewhere deep in the walls. She placed her coffee mug down, tilted her head, and there it was again, the faintest gurgle. She walked toward the bathroom slowly, like approaching something wild. One step, then another. The sound deepened, bubbling like something trying to claw its way out of the drain. Then, blorp. A splash of brown water hit the tile. Not again, she muttered, grabbing a towel. Before she could even react, the toilet belched up a wave. Not just water, but thick, foul-smelling sludge. It flooded across the floor, soaking her bath mat, creeping toward the hallway. The smell was unbearable. She gagged, shoved towels along the baseboards, and fumbled for her phone. Management, it's happening again. I need someone here, now. An hour later, the plumber arrived. Same uniform, same blank look. He didn't apologize, didn't ask permission, just pushed past her, muttering, Gotta go through the toilet this time. He jammed a steel snake into the bowl, grinding, twisting, forcing it down like he was punishing the porcelain. Lena stood there, arms crossed, heart pounding. The sound was awful, metal scraping against ceramic, echoing through the tiny bathroom. When he finally pulled the snake back, he wiped his hands on a rag and said, All done. She looked down. Her toilet was scratched beyond saving, ugly gray lines scarring the white surface, deep gouges like claw marks. It looked permanently dirty, even though it wasn't. You ruined my toilet, she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. He shrugged. It was already old. And just like that, he packed up and left. That was the moment she snapped. She grabbed her phone again, snapping pictures of the damage, the gouges, the stained tiles, the towels she'd sacrificed. Then she wrote another long email to the HOA, this one less polite. This is a shared plumbing issue. The plumber even admitted it. I've had sewage back up 3 times, and now my toilet's destroyed. Their reply came later that evening. Short, cold, dismissive. This appears to be an issue with your unit's internal plumbing. HOA is not responsible. Lena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could feel her pulse in her neck. Internal plumbing? Then why did your maintenance guy have to go through my toilet to fix it? Hours passed. No response. Finally, after a string of increasingly frustrated emails, she got a call from the building manager. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like someone who'd already decided the outcome. "All right, we'll replace your toilet," he said. "But the HOA wants to make one thing clear. We'll never enter your unit again to deal with plumbing issues." She froze. "Wait, you're saying you'll fix shared pipes? Unless they run through my home?" There was a pause, then that voice again, the one she'd come to dread. The HOA president, Karen herself, cut into the call with her syrupy tone. "Exactly," she said. "We've had too many complaints from you, Lena. It's time to let professionals handle things without interference." Lena could hear the smirk in her voice, even over the phone. The line went dead. She stood there in the wreckage of her bathroom, towels soaked, air thick with sewage and disinfectant, toilet scratched beyond repair. Her reflection in the mirror looked as tired as she felt. She whispered to herself, "They think this is over." She turned toward her phone, opened her camera, and started recording every inch of the mess. The stains, the cracks, the proof. "They want to ignore it," she said quietly. "Then they'll get to live with it too." And just like that, the frustration hardened into resolve. The fight wasn't about a toilet anymore. It was about making the HOA smell the consequences of their own neglect. Weeks go by, and for a while I let myself hope it was over. I clean, I air the place out, I sleep with the windows cracked and a candle burning on the sill just to pretend the smell's a bad dream. Then one Tuesday morning, I wake up to that old, hateful sound again. A slow, wet gurgle from somewhere deep in the pipes. Not loud this time, just persistent, like a cough that won't quit. I grab my phone and hit record before I even get out of bed. The audio file is short but ugly, wet bubbling, the faint clunk of water moving through the walls. I make a note, date, time, exactly what happened. And then I walk into the bathroom and stare at the bowl like it owes me money. There's a tiny ripple, then another. The shower drain makes a soft popping noise. Old habits die hard. I throw down towels and set a bucket under the sink. But I know by now that's only a Band-Aid. Mark texts me from across the hall. "Hey, shower's doing that thing again. Ugh." I send him the clip I just took and he replies with 3 exasperated emojis. We both know the drill. Call the office, someone comes, they snake something outside, they leave, and a week later, we're back to square one. The difference now is I keep everything. Videos, timestamps, messages, the whole ugly trail. I email the property manager with a calm, explicit message. I attach the video, I list the dates. I explain that this is a recurring problem affecting multiple ground floor units. I mention the plumber's note that it's likely a shared line issue. I make the tone firm but not angry, for now. An automated reply pings back within an hour. "Thank you for reporting. We will forward this to maintenance." That little script. That promise of action that means nothing. A few days later, I get one of their notices. Not a helpful call. Not a text that says we're on it, but a formal-looking PDF that lands in my inbox like a paper slap. Cease and desist. Stop harassing management and their contractors. I stare at it for a long time. They're actually accusing me of harassment. I read the words again and laugh, a hollow sound that comes out more like a cough than a laugh. They flood my home with sewage and I'm the harasser. They clean the outside drain and the problem comes back. I keep my cool in public, but inside it's a pressure cooker. I take pictures of the notice and drop them into the folder on my desktop labeled Ho Fiasco. I keep everything. Every email. Every voicemail. I start printing things out because paper feels more real than another passive-aggressive message. Cleaning becomes a ritual of indignity. I put on gloves and a mask, like a surgeon entering a war zone. and I scrub until my forearms ache. Bleach, hot water, scrub brush, the motions are mechanical. I gag sometimes, the smell sticking to the back of my throat. The towels are ruined. The grout never goes back to white. I open every window and the cold air comes in, sharp and clean for a second, before it carries that faint, sour memory of what happened. Sometimes I stand in the doorway and breathe the air like a hostage checking for an escape route. Every scrub session is accompanied by a kind of quiet fury. I clean their mess, they ignore the cause. I put things back in order, and they send another scripted email. My neighbors talk in low voices in the hallway now. Some are embarrassed. Some are angry. A few tell me they're scared of making waves. They need their leases renewed. They don't want to be that person. But a few slip me notes. We're with you. Small alliances form like secret handshakes. The gurgles come back more frequently. It used to be once every few weeks. Now it's more like a repeating alarm. I set my phone to record automatically whenever I hear the pipes doing their wet little dance. My phone becomes a shrine of proof, files stacked by date, each one a little evidence bag. I label them, back them up, and keep a hard copy list. It's tedious, it's exhausting, and it's the only thing that keeps me from blowing a fuse. I try one more polite email. This time I attach the plumber's written opinion. Clear, professional, mainline blockage, shared infrastructure implicated. I CC the HOA board. I do it the way the rules say to do it, by the book. Someone finally replies, but it's the same hollow noise. We will review and forward. That's their favorite line. Forward, review, resolve. Words that paper overwrought. Then I get a passive-aggressive voicemail. Ms. Coleman, management requests you cease excessive communication regarding this issue. If this behavior persists, we will document it as tenant harassment. I listen to it twice, the polite voice rubbing salt into the wound. Document it. Harassment. As if reporting sewage backups is a personality flaw. That's when the anger stops being a simmer and starts to harden into a plan. I am meticulous by necessity now. If they're going to pretend nothing is wrong, I'll make sure the problem can't be ignored. If they won't fix the shared pipes because it requires entering my unit, I'll make them confront the consequences the moment they step into public spaces they actually care about. The lobby, the boardroom, their little glossy notices on the community bulletin. I assemble everything I have. The video files, printed photos of the brown ring that never comes out of the bowl, the plumber's note, the torn towels, the receipts for cleaning supplies. I put them in a folder. Then I take 3 empty glass jars, sterilize them, and label them carefully. Sample, ground floor unit A. I fill each with a measured amount of the foul water I collected, not for drama, but to prove a point. I seal them tight and tape my documentation to each one like a grim little exhibit. I wear my gloves and mask to the elevator, because at this point, I don't care who thinks I'm dramatic. I walk into the management office with those jars in my hands, set them on the counter and say, voice steady, "You told me to stop harassing the management. I brought you the evidence." The look on the manager's face before he even unscrews a lid is the first real reaction I've had from them in months. A flicker of surprise, then discomfort. They open one jar, and the smell floods the small office like a physical thing. Sharp, foul, immediate. The assistant recoils, hand over her mouth. Papers rustle as people stand up, eyes watering. No one's laughing now. No one's using the word resolved. Their faces are red, the way mine used to be on cleanup days. And suddenly my emails are not just words on a screen. They're an irritation that's become unavoidable. I walk back to my unit, and for the first time in weeks I feel less alone. The jars are a crude thing, but they are proof in a language my HOA understands. Immediate, embarrassing, and public. The retaliation was twofold. They tried to silence me, and they tried to make the problem disappear by ignoring it. This time I turned the consequences into evidence, and that small, ugly victory makes the next step possible. I collected everything I had like I was building a case. Photos of the brown ring that never came off the bowl. Close-ups of the deep scratches the maintenance snake left. Screenshots of the polite, Useless emails that kept telling me the problem was resolved. I printed them all, labeled each page with dates and times, and stapled the plumber's written opinion on top. The one line that mattered. Mainline blockage. Shared plumbing implicated. Then I did something a little ridiculous and a little necessary. I sterilized 3 glass jars until they gleamed, filled them with measured amounts of the nasty water I'd saved after the last backup, and taped a printed label to each. Sample, ground floor, Unit A. I wrote the date, the unit number, and attached a short note. See attached documentation. This has been ongoing since date. I sealed the lids tight, taped the paperwork to the jars, and slid them into a small cardboard box like I was mailing evidence to a museum. I wore gloves and a mask because by then the smell still made me wince, and I didn't want to give anyone an excuse to ignore what I was doing. I walked into the building office during the hour their board usually filed in for meetings. The receptionist glanced up, bored, until she noticed the box in my hands. Her face changed in a way I'd been waiting to see. Confusion, then curiosity, then a little dread. I asked where the HOA meeting room was, and was led down the corridor past the bulletin board with glossy flyers and committee notices. People were already taking their seats. I set the box quietly outside the office door and rang the bell for the meeting coordinator. I didn't want drama. I wanted them to be the ones to notice. A board member opened the door, saw the jars, and frowned. Someone finally unscrewed a lid. That first tiny release of air hit the hallway and moved into the room like an unwelcome guest. Eyes watered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman near the front gagged and clapped a hand over her mouth. Karen's brow tightened. She looked at the jar like she'd been slapped. I walked in then, calm as I could be, and set down my folder of printed photos right in front of the president's seat. I didn't shout. I didn't point. I let the quiet do the work, the way the smell would not let them pretend. They opened the attached documents. The printed plumber's note stared up at them like a verdict. Board members flipped through the stapled pages, faces shifting from annoyance to surprise to a slow kind of embarrassment. Karen tried to say something about procedure and prior notification, but her voice came out thinner than usual. I waited for the room to focus. Then, in a steady voice, I said, "Now you know what I've been living with." There was no theatrical flourish, just the plain truth. The jars, the photos, the plumber's note, all laid out like proof. Heads nodded around the table. Someone muttered that they'd assumed it was an isolated unit problem. Someone else cleared their throat and looked at Karen. The meeting that was supposed to be about monthly landscaping suddenly turned into an emergency conversation about plumbing. Responsibility. People who had been avoiding me in the lobby came forward quietly, admitting their own odd clogs and gurgles. A neighbor I barely knew put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We heard you. We just didn't know how to help." The board coordinator, now pale, promised to call an independent inspector and to get the whole main line checked immediately. I didn't crow. I let them sit with the inconvenience they'd ignored for months. The jars were a small, ugly thing, but they spoke a language the HOA couldn't email away. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the scales had finally tipped. Not because I'd screamed louder, but because I'd organized, documented, and refused to let them gaslight me into silence. The jars stayed on the table until they were photographed and logged into their meeting minutes, and somebody, not me, made a note to schedule a full plumbing inspection that afternoon. I collected everything I had like I was building a case. Photos of the brown ring that never came off the bowl, close-ups of the deep scratches the maintenance snake left, screenshots of the polite, useless emails that kept telling me the problem was resolved. I printed them all, labeled each page with dates and times, and stapled the plumber's written opinion on top. The one line that mattered. Mainline blockage. Shared plumbing implicated. Then I did something a little ridiculous and a little necessary. I sterilized 3 glass jars until they gleamed, filled them with measured amounts of the nasty water I'd saved after the last backup, and taped a printed label to each. Sample, ground floor, Unit A. I wrote the date, the unit number, and attached a short note. See attached documentation. This has been ongoing since date. I sealed the lids tight, taped the paperwork to the jars, and slid them into a small cardboard box like I was mailing evidence to a museum. I wore gloves and a mask because by then the smell still made me wince, and I didn't want to give anyone an excuse to ignore what I was doing. I walked into the building office during the hour their board usually filed in for meetings. The receptionist glanced up, bored, until she noticed the box in my hands. Her face changed in a way I'd been waiting to see. Confusion, then curiosity, then a little dread. I asked where the HOA meeting room was, and was led down the corridor past the bulletin board with glossy flyers and committee notices. People were already taking their seats. I set the box quietly outside the office door and rang the bell for the meeting coordinator. I didn't want drama. I wanted them to be the ones to notice. A board member opened the door, saw the jars, and frowned. Someone finally unscrewed a lid. That first tiny release of air hit the hallway and moved into the room like an unwelcome guest. Eyes watered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman near the front gagged and clapped a hand over her mouth. Karen's brow tightened. She looked at the jar like she'd been slapped. I walked in then, calm as I could be, and set down my folder of printed photos right in front of the president's seat. I didn't shout. I didn't point. I let the quiet do the work, the way the smell would not let them pretend. They opened the attached documents. The printed plumber's note stared up at them like a verdict. Board members flipped through the stapled pages, faces shifting from annoyance to surprise to a slow kind of embarrassment. Karen tried to say something about procedure and prior notification, but her voice came out thinner than usual. I waited for the room to focus. Then, in a steady voice, I said, "Now you know what I've been living with." There was no theatrical flourish, just the plain truth. The jars, the photos, the plumber's note, all laid out like proof. Heads nodded around the table. Someone muttered that they'd assumed it was an isolated unit problem. Someone else cleared their throat and looked at Karen. The meeting that was supposed to be about monthly landscaping suddenly turned into an emergency conversation about plumbing. Responsibility. People who had been avoiding me in the lobby came forward quietly, admitting their own odd clogs and gurgles. A neighbor I barely knew put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We heard you. We just didn't know how to help." The board coordinator, now pale, promised to call an independent inspector and to get the whole main line checked immediately. I didn't crow. I let them sit with the inconvenience they'd ignored for months. The jars were a small, ugly thing, but they spoke a language the HOA couldn't email away. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the scales had finally tipped. Not because I'd screamed louder, but because I'd organized, documented, and refused to let them gaslight me into silence. The jars stayed on the table until they were photographed and logged into their meeting minutes, and somebody, not me, made a note to schedule a full plumbing inspection that afternoon. The next morning, the condo felt strangely still. No gurgling, no distant echoes of drains. Just a tense quiet, like the building was holding its breath. Then before noon, the emails began. The HOA called an emergency maintenance and compliance review. They never used words like emergency before. By 1 p.m., 2 plumbers were unloading heavy equipment in front of the complex, their boots splashing through puddles that had been ignored for weeks. Lena watched from her window, arms crossed, as the maintenance truck was joined by a white van with city inspection services printed in bold blue letters. That's when she smiled, just slightly. Inside the building, the air was thick with bleach and tension. Karen, the HOA president, hovered near the conference room door, her perfume doing its best to fight the lingering odor of the jars that had made their statement yesterday. She spotted Lena walking down the hallway and stiffened. The inspector, clipboard in hand, was already questioning the maintenance team. He'd reviewed Lena's photos, plumber's statement, and the HOA's internal notes. When he lifted a ceiling tile in the hallway and heard the faint gurgle echo through the pipes, he nodded grimly. "This is a shared mainline issue," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can't blame an individual unit for this." Karen's voice cut in quickly, defensive and brittle. She's been exaggerating. She's been aggressive with our staff. The inspector turned sharply, his tone firm. Your management ignored a documented sanitation hazard. That's a direct violation of City Housing and Maintenance Code. I'll be filing a report. The room went quiet. That kind of silence that means someone just realized they're out of excuses. By late afternoon, new equipment was brought in. Workers traced the blockage to a collapsed section of the shared waste line just outside Lena's unit. Years of buildup and neglect. The HOA had to sign off on an urgent replacement order, the cost easily running into thousands. And per the inspector's directive, they were also responsible for professional sanitation cleanup inside affected units, starting with Lena's. As the cleanup crew entered her home in full protective gear, a few neighbors gathered nearby whispering. One older resident gave Lena a thumbs up. Another quietly said, "You did what all of us wanted to do." Karen passed through the hallway, face pale, trying to avoid any glance of acknowledgement. Lena didn't stop her. She didn't need to. The sound of drills and pipes being replaced said everything. When the inspector walked by, clipboard under his arm, Lena simply said, "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "You did your homework. Most people don't." As the workers packed up and the smell of clean disinfectant began to replace the old one, Lena stood by her doorway, finally breathing normally. She looked down the hall toward the HOA office and murmured, just loud enough for herself to hear, "Guess it finally sunk in." The smell of responsibility. A faint laugh escaped her lips. The poetic kind of justice. Not loud, not dramatic, but satisfying. The kind that smells like victory. And a freshly replaced sewer line.